All right, so we could talk about. Well, actually, here I'll put both of them up here. So we got Jackson, who wrote the lottery, and then Buckley's article. My guess is more people are going to be talking about that one, but hey, we'll just kind of wait and see. But what are things besides why, Mr. Kane? Why? Strike you about either, both, and then the inevitable question, which we don't have to answer quite yet, is why they paired together? Because they're certainly a little bit different.
It seemed like they didn't want to do what they did at the end of the lottery, but it was tradition, so nobody complained about it. They just did it.
Okay, so oops, I want the same color. So the fact that there's tradition, no real complaints, tying back into his title, why don't we complain, that kind of thing. And, what's, I guess the answer would certainly vary from family to family. What's like the most common phrase that an exasperated parent makes to a child, whether you're 9 or 19, especially if you do something that parent doesn't think you should be doing? All of your friends jumped off the bridge. Would you jump too? No, Mom, I wouldn't. Some of you will do the smart aleck response, yes, Mom, I would. Shirley Jackson, her argument probably would be, yeah, you would. You're all going to jump off the bridge. Especially when you're in a community. And I wouldn't say it's like a peer pressure thing solely. We're talking about, drugs, alcohol, those kinds of things. But I think it's certainly more of a critical viewpoint of America in general. The story gets published in 1948. It appears in the New Yorker, which is big time literary publication. the year, in all seriousness, guess what year more people canceled their subscription to the New Yorker than any other year? 1948, shortly after her story showed up. They're like, what? You gotta be kidding me. There's no way I'm going to keep reading this stuff and cancel subscription. Probably because they were very upset of the viewpoint. She got a ton of, I wouldn't call it hate mail necessarily, but a lot of letters going, this was the weirdest, cruelest, strangest, most absurd thing I've ever read. Love you, Mom and Dad. I mean, she even got critical letters from literally her parents about what she was writing. So certainly I think she would argue that we put a lot of emphasis on tradition without really knowing about it. Alexis, I don't remember the exact word that you said, that it was along the lines of people aren't necessarily for it or want to do it, but still participate.
Yeah, they handed her kids stones, and it didn't look like the kids wanted to hit her with them, but they did it anyway.
Yeah, and so that part where they bring, here you go, hit mommy, go for it. Looking back, though, over the way the story starts, I would say, especially with the kids, some of them are all, it's Stone Day. Bobby, get over here. Oh, wants to play by the pile of rocks, and we certainly don't realize what's going on at that point, but as you get to the end, that's kind of messed up somewhat with it. So what are some things that do strike you from this? So it would be even if people don't necessarily want to partake, there's still willing participation. And even if the kids are throwing stones that are this size, there's still blunt force trauma to the head of mom is taking place. So willingness to participate. What else? Little details that you noticed might not have seemed super significant at the time.
Man's names, Summers and Grace.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting because, it was a summer, it happened in June, and Grace was I just thought it was ironic, or it was probably intentional.
Little negative foreshadowing kind of taking place. Even if we don't have a specific reason for why the name would jump out, remember any other names that show up in the story? I don't think we had any of our own names pop up. It's fun when you have like a Dunbar sitting in class and Dunbar or Summers and all those kinds of things. So for example, there was Dunbar was a name. Obviously we know there's Hutchinson, and you can look at the story itself. Remember any others? Delacroix. We're drawing blanks. Alexis, you remember any?
It's like the Old Man Warner.
Old Man Warner. Who complains about everything? Young folk these days, they want to get rid of it. Sometimes we've been getting rid of this. That's silly. That's nonsense. Martins. Who's standing? It's at the end of the story, so it'd be like page 7. Who's standing next to Mr. Graves at the very end? Noel, we'll let you find it. This isn't the name, but there's like Zanini. That was on page 7. I'll cut the suspense, save you the time. Steve Adams. You have the Adams that are there. Anything popping out about names at all? I mean, mention the Graves and Summers.
Well, all of the first names were really, really generic. They seemed like Bobby and
The first names.
yeah, the first
Okay.
names.
Baxter is one that pops up a couple times. What do you think about last names? Delacroix. Well, Delacroix is the way that it's been said now. If we were to guess ethnicity, probably going to be Elena, French. Zanini, probably going Italian. Any other ethnicities? No, with any others? I've had a lot of people say Dunbar is German. I don't know if it is or not. Griff, what were you going to say? British, yeah. But you certainly have a variety of names of ethnicities that would be jumping, that would be showing up. This is published in 1948. If all, no offense, Max, if the last name was Bauer, Himmler, Hitler, you had a lot of German names going along with it. I don't think people would be quite as shocked because you literally just had Holocaust take place, which, not that it was tradition, but you could argue that there certainly should have been more complaining taking place for what was happening. But this is a mix where, yeah, there's definitely are British names that are taking place with the Graves, being one of those. But you have a mix of ethnicity, so it's not as if one group is strictly getting picked on with this one. Summers, we mentioned, kind of has a little bit of a positive connotation. Graves certainly has one that's a little bit more negative. This is a name that kind of jumps out to me a little bit, and especially at the end. Any ideas why? What if we looked at it as a first name rather than a last name? If we were to say, who's Adam? What's a common answer? Or an uncommon answer at this point? First man. Obviously from a religious viewpoint. Her name also kind of jumps out to me. And not Tessie, but any other Hutchinsons that we know of? Who's that? Okay. Any from beyond the story? more as like illusions. What happens to Tessie? She gets stoned to death. Do we know any Hutchinsons who have been put on trial a little bit? Elena's now covering her mouth. That usually means something. I don't know what. Who's Anne Hutchinson? She's not part of the Salem witch trials, but she's one of the first accused like witches in North American colonies and things like that. And basically, public trial is taking place, for her to be exiled and banished and things like that. So to have a New England town making a spectacle out of Hutchinson, I do think there's a little bit of some historical allusion that would kind of be taking place to it. Which this happens in whose history? Not Germany's history, not Great Britain's history, not Switzerland or Italy's, but it's almost kind of like an American tradition that we do kind of locate an outcast that would take place. Some things that we know, Dunbar, they're the ones who probably were picked last year because the son is the one who has to come up and pick it, and they go, take your time, don't worry about it, son. As he goes up, he's probably pretty nervous about it. So even if you have already been chosen before, you still certainly have to go through with it again. Delacroix. It's a French name. Anyone taking French? What's it like actually mean? Like if your name was Baker, we would go, what's a baker? A guy who makes bread. Or if you were Smith, iron work, metal work. Dinesh Delacroix? No clue. Delacroix? No. Isn't it like that sparkling water that people drink? Yeah, I know. Any idea? What kind of French do you take? Of the Croix. If it were Russian, I knew you would get it. But you've impressed me now. You're going cross language. Of the cross. What's happened to the pronunciation of the name? It's been changed, it's been altered. If you want to really make a negative stance, you'd say it's been perverted. The viewpoints, and I think that's why you kind of get a little bit of credence with this one, maybe having that purposeful Adams being first man. What do a lot of people kind of think of as being a moral compass, especially in Old Town New England, religious values and things like that? And you take a look at the list that you folks were making, you were taking your quiz, family, friends, and then there was some combination, I'd say, of faith or morality, religion was kind of in there as probably the top three, and your dog, which I absolutely understand. You could argue that's friends and family, all rolled into one. But maybe some of these values that people hold near and dear, they don't necessarily follow them as much as they want. I think it's interesting that Adams is standing there at the very end. And who is he next to? He's next to Graves, who kind of has, Noel was noticing Graves' name, kind of like that Grim Reaper quality about him. I'm the one who's going to swear everyone in, and we're going to choose this person, and you're all going to end up in a grave sooner or later, be it through stoning or something else. But having like that first man, this is something that's always kind of gone on, but we don't really know why, but we don't complain about it, kind of adds to that. Any idea, since they never really say why, this has always been going on? They give us any hints whatsoever. Yeah, they have their little saying, lotteries in June, corn will be heavy soon. So there probably is, and this isn't to say that it would be, therefore it should be allowed, this is okay, but it's probably some kind of agricultural sacrifice, so to speak. Is that really why they do it now? No. Why do they do it now? Because it's tradition. So what would then be kind of like an overall purpose as to why Jackson would bring forth a story like this? Probably self-reflection. Maybe kind of questioning societal norms. Making sure that we wouldn't just all jump off a bridge. And I think if you take a look at that post-World War II era in which it comes out, following the war, what might be a viewpoint that a lot of Americans have? We're the good guys. We won. We put an end to that Nazi regime and all those kinds of things. But it's almost as if she's kind of shining a light on, hey, we might not be as good as we think we are. Maybe there are some things that we do have to look at. Maybe we do have some skeletons in our closet. And you take a look at maybe not societal norms, but you certainly take a look at actions or in some cases traditions that do still exist or viewpoints that people have. It doesn't take much to look in the daily news and see events that have been taking place over the last couple of weeks where you go, maybe there are some viewpoints or traditions that may be values that some people might hold that, you know what, they really aren't all that great at all. So it's a little bit of kind of like that eye-opening, I think, experience that she's trying to get across. Buckley argues we don't complain enough. It's too hot. It's too cold. You said it was cold. You didn't really complain. You didn't say, go change the temperature. I'm leaving. Movies probably aren't out of focus as much anymore because projectors have kind of changed and things like that. Do you agree with him that we don't complain enough? Or has a lot happened in the last 56 years where you think we complain too much now? I mean, Dinesh complains it doesn't have power and money half the time.
I think like in person, you don't complain as much, but online, you don't have to say it out loud.
What was the last part you said?
Like the online part.
Okay, so like a social media posting or something like that. Kind of like hiding behind the screen thing, but in a face-to-face conference, and not saying picking a fight with somebody, but okay. Even if you're in the right, it's not worth my time. I don't want to make a big scene about it. Blah blah blah.
But what I think about complaining now is different from how complaining is in the article, because in the article it's more like, not like standing up for yourself, but kind of just sort of like that. Now it's more like when I think of complaining now, I think of, oh, I have so much work and I have soccer projects or whatever, just like kind of complaining about things like that, like responsibilities.
So not like significant issues, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, more of like the, I want to say this, not that you're trying to get sympathy, but
Like ranting, like getting your feelings
the
out.
connotation is it's not quite as severe as necessary. I have to write an essay for Thursday this week. Oh my goodness. And Alexis is going to look at you like, been there, done that, I really don't care. Whereas if you were dealing with some kind of legal issue ramification, that's not necessarily a complaint, at least the way that we use it.
I think that complain about things that they're capable of changing, but instead of just going out and changing it.
Do you do that?
Yeah. Like in my life it's like, or like around my house, some people, my parents will like complain about their weight or something like that. But like it's their fault, like everyone's choosing to eat the way they do and like not exercise. And then like in my life with sports, like if someone's like complaining that they don't get enough playing time, like they have the ability to change it, like if they like put in the work.
Okay. That's an interesting point. Do we complain about, and not that we're coming up with percentages 2/3 of the time we do most of our complaints deal with things that we could correct ourselves? You could have written that essay. I mean, you could be done with it. She wouldn't have to hear about it. Anna could not play tennis or just write quicker, and then she wouldn't have to worry about finishing an essay. So yeah, and do you think that people do simply to get sympathy for it? Just feels good to say something about it, but it's harder to kind of go through the actions to actually correct something?
Yeah, I guess they have like self-pity or something.
I just think just wants to like I think people should complain less about things that they can change. Like she was saying, people always complaining about like I said, like how much homework they have. Like if you use just like half the time you spend complaining about it, it would be done. Just do it.
I obviously didn't read the back paragraph that you guys wrote. Anyone go morally justifiable for the lottery? There's usually that one. Dinesh, I had my money like hoping on you. No, not morally justifiable. Did you say morally justifiable?
I kind of, I mean, I like agreed with like a concept of a lottery. Like if you have to do something like that, like that's okay. But like the fact that they stoned her was not okay. Like you could have picked something that was like less painful.
If we were going to eliminate someone, at least it was by random.
Random.
Okay.
Or like something less painful.
Are you going to throw the stone? No. You would not. You going to throw the stone? Matt, go to the bathroom. Maybe. Anyone else want to? You said you would throw the stone. Not saying you want to. I'm not making you to be a horrible person. You said yes. Why are you throwing it?
I feel like if I was like grew up thinking that was okay, like it was like a tradition.
And yeah, this being under the assumption that we don't like take Dinesh right now and just drop him there, and it's him and Hannah's been chosen. Are you going to throw this? That's a whole different dynamic. But if you grew up in that town, would you throw the stone? I have a hard time. No offense, Hannah. I have a hard time thinking that people would not do it.
Maybe too afraid.
And yeah, that certainly could be part of it. It's one thing, and I think Maggie's point is very, very valid and honest. If you grow up thinking that that's not necessarily even the right thing to do, but it's something that you do. You know, who are your role models? Generally, it must be a lot of family and friends, because those were values that people have been, putting on their sheet. If Kevin's been throwing the stones all these years, if Drew's been throwing stones all these years, and Michaela looks up to Drew, I don't know if you look up to Drew. Don't feel the need to answer. But if you've been seeing your friends and family do it, then yeah, what do? You start doing the same thing. How do things like racism and bigotry fester? It becomes kind of like the ethics or morals of certain, whether it be families, groups, communities, things like that. And I don't think this would be a whole lot different. So I think her point that, you know what, we might have to kind of look at ourselves in the mirror and do we value things that we shouldn't, or do we value things that maybe are not as important as other things should be? That's a pretty big thing to consider. Sundays. What do people associate with Sundays? What do people associate Sundays with in Pittsburgh come fall? And it's not saying which is more important to you or anything like that, but certainly values will switch. If you were to go to a random church service in like April, you'll see shirts and ties and dresses and all that kind of stuff. You go to a church service in December, Steeler jersey. Minister might have a terrible towel over the pulpit. Or something like that. So values certainly do change. So I think a big common trait between the two is not just, and your point was absolutely one of the reasons why they do get paired together. People don't really complain about something that they view as being a tradition, and how many of us would. But certainly values kind of start to come in. What is a value within Jackson's story? Definitely tradition. I don't think tradition is necessarily a value that Buckley would be looking at. But what is something that people sometimes value? lack of confrontation, lack of, not necessarily violence in saying that if Matt were to complain about something that it's going to become a physical confrontation. But I think people do kind of value not having to be in that situation where there's going to be some kind of conflict taking place. For our purposes, we're not stoning anybody, and you will be complaining about things, but one of our main things to kind of consider throughout the course of the semester, especially when it comes to the speaking assignments. Come on, there you go. Understand what the values are of the people that you're speaking against. I'm not attacking anyone. I'm going to go with a stereotype. Any environmentalists in here? Save the trees. Death coming to the earth. Go green. Recycle. Okay. Why is the environment so important? Yeah. So what's the value that you tie specifically to this argument? It's a life argument for you. Not saying who's anti-environment. I don't think Dinesh is taking oil and just like spilling it into the rivers or anything like that. Maybe. Not big of a deal to anybody. We're going to go climate change is a hoax. I knew he was going to raise his hand. What's that? Okay. What would be a reason why people would not be worried about the environment nearly as much as Elena and a lot of other folks would be?
Because I think, if it dies, it's not going to be in my lifetime, so why worry about it?
Okay. This might be for grandkids or great-grandkids, but it's not going to be my issue. I'm going to drive my Ford 350, 8 miles a gallon, 24-inch tires. Max is like just going to try to squish over everybody. Why do people still kind of follow along with that? In some ways, it's probably convenience to switch, not necessarily a switch, but to go pro environment all the time. It's a life change for people. So if you're making an argument against someone who is, we need to make changes for someone who, no, we don't, it's going to be a difficult conversation to have because the two values are probably not going to match. It's a life or death argument for Elena. It could be a convenience argument for Alexis. No, it's more convenient for me not to make any kind of switches. So anytime we do have those arguments, you want to try to tap into what are the values that are going to be in question, and that gives you a way to kind of approach it a little bit more. This week, just the reading assignment. We're going to finish off those notes from yesterday or from last week tomorrow, and we'll go from there.